So, there we are. New year, new yaps, and what a topic to start 2025 off with. Contracts ending, contracts beginning. Lewis Hamilton is now officially a Ferrari Formula One driver. And all the more reason to discuss why this is completely uncharted territory for both parties. It could go fantastically, it could go disastrously, but for us, we're here all the way. When the clock struck midnight in London, Hamilton's Mercedes contract ended, with a flurry of final goodbyes for both he and Carlos Sainz. The two drivers have now begun their respective journeys for real. However, you get the feeling that Lewis Hamilton is in no rush to get rid of all the Mercedes garb and then put on red overalls, even though in Abu Dhabi he was wearing red. Because when you compare his social media profiles to Carlos Sainz's social media profiles, within like 2 hours apparently, Carlos changed his profile on Instagram from Ferrari driver to Williams driver. Man, that boy is keen. And I don't blame Lewis for being a little bit slow on the uptake, for realising he's now a part of Ferrari. He's been with Mercedes for as long as he can remember, since the beginning of his teen years, and now he's not. So it's going to take some time to adjust. And not to mention for the fact he is going to become only the 13th British Formula One Ferrari driver in its history. That's quite a rare sight. Although admittedly Oliver Behrman did steal the honour of being the first one to race in red since the late 1990s when Eddie Irvine had the honour. And I am aware that some of you might be just going, oh no wait, actually Law, it's Nigel Mansell what was the last British racing driver for Ferrari. Well, no, Northern Ireland counts, let's be real. At the time, Eddie Irvine raced with a British licence, because Northern Ireland, UK. There you go. Lewis is the latest multiple world champion to attempt to restore championship order to the team after the revenge arc of Fred Vasseur began in 2023. And he's definitely gotten the Scuderia back on its feet for sure, in contention for world championships. You really got to understand where Ferrari has been for the longest time. They have been some fair distance between themselves and the likes of Mercedes and Red Bull. Whereas now, they were only 14 points behind McLaren. There was a real chance in Abu Dhabi they could have won the whole thing, the team title, the first since 2008. If Lando Norris hadn't won that race, Ferrari would have had it. Needless to say though, everyone is speculating as to how the working relationship between Lewis, his old boss from ART's GP2 team Fred Vasseur, and the Tifosi and that dynamic, how it will work. Well, according to Fred, it won't be a simple copy-paste solution. They are not going to be just repeating what Lewis Hamilton could have expected from the likes of Mercedes, Toto Wolff, all of that stuff, just because they've been hiring some real senior Mercedes figures like Louis Serra and Jerome D'Ambrosio, doesn't necessarily mean they are buying them just to make sure that they understand how Lewis Hamilton ticks as a Mercedes driver. They are there because they are good people, and they're hoping also that Lewis Hamilton will understand how Ferrari works. And that is something that is a little bit of a question mark. The Frenchman's confident that he will find a way to manage Lewis that will work for both him and the team itself, because that is a cause for concern, because one thing has to be made clear for any Lewis Hamilton fan that is coming over from Mercedes to Ferrari. The red team does things very differently to the guys over at Brackley. No one person is bigger than Ferrari, the car company, unless your name is Enzo Ferrari or you are a member of the Ferrari family. Anyone else, you work for Ferrari. Ferrari doesn't work for you. Mercedes were actually quite relaxed. It's why Lewis went there in the first place, or at least one of the main reasons why, because it would have given him the space for him to actually become his own man, as we have seen since basically 2014. I only need point you to the job listing that Mercedes has, that they're looking for a fashion consultant in the wake of Lewis departing their team. That is a big impact. You would have never had anything like that in the Ron Dennis era of McLaren, especially near the end of his time as McLaren boss. I only need point you to what Ron Dennis was like. He was a man who had an idea for how his team would present itself, as well as his drivers, and he wouldn't have anyone else question it. He would court sponsors and partners with promises of utilising his drivers as much as possible at the cost of their own personal quirks. They were tools as part of his machine. Now, granted, we weren't privy to the whole details as to what went on behind the scenes because social media wasn't really a thing until the end of his tenure. But you only need look at pictures of Lewis Hamilton in his years at McLaren, and you felt like he was not really his full person. He looked like he was lacking identity, that he was just there as a driver and nothing else. Jenson Button himself, in many articles and books, goes on to say that practically whenever they were not racing, their schedules were rammed with sponsorship engagements, and he learnt to just accept it and roll with it because well, that's how you got your paychecks. So fast forward to Lewis Hamilton, and after a year at Mercedes, it's clear as day. Lewis very much cares about expressing himself, and he was allowed to do so as part of Mercedes GP. And his passion became really evident. It wasn't for profit or to chase trends or make trends, as he tells the Telegraph. It's about finding clothes which make him feel good, and that the gear he wears to events and Grand Prix make him feel like a superhero, that he can be himself. And you can't deny, having that sort of liberation really worked out for him at Mercedes in the end. All of those championships, all those wins. With Ferrari, I'm not really sure whether he'll have that same amount of freedom and ability to express himself 100%. Now, don't get me wrong. The Italian fashionistas, the fashion houses of Italy, they are going to be salivating at the prospect of working closely with Lewis Hamilton, especially when he really gets his Italian down and they can really get to grips with making themselves, Lewis, Ferrari, into the ultimate super brand, a luxury product, a real thing that Italy can be proud of, even though Lewis is British. The team has obviously convinced Hamilton well enough that his personal freedoms will not be curtailed to the point of what it was like back at McLaren. But there is also one thing to take into account for anybody who crosses the threshold of Maranello, regardless of their status within F1 or the wider world. Like I touched upon, you are not bigger than Ferrari, no matter who it is. Now, Lewis Hamilton, it's the biggest challenge to that concept. You've got to admit that no one person, not Michael Schumacher, not Ayrton Senna, not anybody who has ever been in Formula One is bigger than Ferrari, not Max Verstappen. Lewis Hamilton makes you pause and go like, oh, good question. Because you've got to admit, he is probably one of the biggest mainstream celebrities on the planet outside of motorsport. Pretty much anybody is aware of Lewis Hamilton, even if you don't follow Formula One. But you do get the sense that at Ferrari, no matter who you are, there is an aura around the team and egos are very much kept in check, not just through micromanagement, but through sheer historical brute force. You do not last long at Ferrari if your ego is really big and if you believe that you're the bog's dollars. I mean, just take a look at Alain Prost. And it's not like Ferrari's self-righteous or pompous. They've got the credentials to justify that. They've been around Formula One since the beginning. They have earned this. They have won billions of dollars in prize money. The prestige they have, it's far more than billions of dollars spent on corporate soulless advertising and marketing could ever hope to buy them. This is something they earned on the track, and that is something you have to put in a lot of blood, sweat and tears to achieve and accomplish. Alright, Law, I get the bigger picture. You're saying that Lewis Hamilton will upend convention and change Ferrari into something that it's not, or maybe revolutionize it. Well, no. Because I think Lewis Hamilton is far too smart to just go in there and expect everything to bend to his whim willy-nilly without any sort of pushback. No, there is going to be an adjustment period, as it were, but I do think that he will be aware of the historical significance of the team. He will do his best, but there might be some gaffes and mistakes along the way. He might say something at a press conference that doesn't align with Ferrari. Ferrari might do something that makes Lewis Hamilton question them or be a little bit critical. It happens to everybody. Every single person that comes along, the multiple world champions, they do push back a bit at Ferrari, but ultimately they do understand that Ferrari is bigger than them, no matter who they are. I don't think Lewis is going to have the same amount of freedom that he had at Mercedes, whereas Toto just basically went, oh yeah, Lewis, basically you could just do what you want, because Buster said himself, it's not going to be a copy-paste situation for Hamilton. It's going to be different, but the question is, how different? On the surface, you might be thinking, well, it probably might stay the same, because according to John Elkann, the Ferrari chairman, he's promised to do whatever Lewis wants regarding his personal projects, foundations, missions. There may come times when Hamilton might just have something going on which Ferrari doesn't agree with, and they may not fund it, or they might just completely ignore it. It might be accidental, but do keep an eye out. Now, for the longest time, I was a little bit cautious as to go really in depth to my reservations regarding Lewis Hamilton, because it was a speculative thing. It hadn't happened yet. For the longest time, Lewis Hamilton was still a Mercedes driver. But now, January the 1st, I can go full Hamilton. And why I think that the arrangement between Lewis Hamilton and John Elkann, it's something that Ferrari has never ever seen before. It was just an opportunity that was just too exciting to pass up, regardless of how the team was doing in the sport. And it's an example of the chairman of the car company getting involved in the Scuderia. something of which is a rarity based on Enzo's own wishes to keep the F1 team and the car company extremely separate from one another. Because since his death in 1988, there have been multiple occasions where the boss and president of Ferrari, be it Sergio Marchionne, the likes of Luca de Montezemolo, they've gotten involved in what the F1 team is doing and go, hey, that guy's involved. Get him on us. We will pay for him. There's, of course, Michael Schumacher, there's Fernando Alonso, Kimi Raikkonen, Sebastian Vettel, and the list goes on. I'm not really counting Alain Prost because that was sort of a mutual understanding. They sort of worked together on an equal basis, because Alain Prost and Ayrton Senna, they didn't want to work together anymore. So Ferrari, that was the next best option at the time. The point, though, here is that this occurrence is a rare one and comes around only when the company seemingly sees it justified to acquire the services of a high-profile driver at great expense when the team is really down in the dumps. And this example is so different to other ones that I just mentioned, because the outgoing driver or drivers were notably on the decline, they were retiring, or the relationship between them and the team had broken down severely. But when you stop to think about it, none of this is happening. Charles Leclerc, Carlos Sainz, they got on just fine. They were a perfectly functional unit, akin to the likes of Jean Alesi and Gerhard Berger. You would expect them to be around for the duration for many, many years, just bringing in the points, seeing Ferrari back up to the top, and be a relatively competent combination that wouldn't really get into trouble, and they wouldn't detest each other. They got on just fine. Now, okay, in 2024, when it looked like that Ferrari could actually win both titles, had the opportunities and things lied, and Max Verstappen hadn't been so strong at the beginning, then things might have gone a little bit fractious, like at the Spanish Grand Prix, for example, and at Las Vegas. But you just still got the feeling that they were both working together for the same thing, and neither driver was terrible. For 3 out of the 4 seasons that Carlos Sainz was around as Charles Leclerc's teammate, he was in the top 5, and that is a fairly good going. Usually there's a disparity between the top driver and the second driver. Here, they were relatively close to each other. I mean, there was still a bit of a gap, but one was not dragging down the other. And Carlos was able to continue his reputation in turning teams around and doing his part in aiding their rejuvenation, much like he did with Renault and McLaren, them being more successful operations by the time he would move on to the next project. And I doubt that Williams will be in worse shape by the time Carlos chooses to leave, wherever that may be, or whenever that may be. As a result, I just feel like this combination of efforts, this joining of forces between Ferrari and Lewis, is a little bit untraditional, it's unorthodox, it's strange, it's almost unnecessary, really. It either comes across as greedy or desperate. Now, I am not dissing Lewis Hamilton whatsoever, because this is a deal that he's been wanting since he was a child. If he couldn't race for Mercedes, then it would be for Ferrari. So good for him that he was able to realise this childhood dream that not many people get to realise, especially if you're a British person. I am happy for Lewis, and I wish him well in this next phase of his career. Whether or not this might be for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, whatever, this is going to be something that's going to be exciting him and us as fans of the sport. But for Ferrari, this is really, really different. This is unprecedented that this kind of driver is being brought in at a time when Ferrari's actually doing okay. They're not at a point in crisis, or they're completely lost, or they're having a really bad time with their drivers and they need somebody fresh. No, it's absolutely fine. And yet they decided to drop $100 million a year anyway. But I guess any team would probably want Lewis Hamilton if he was going and he was available. But still, it's just a little bit unorthodox. It's strange, it's unexpected. I mean, it's certainly exciting, don't get me wrong. I hope it works. And I bet that Lewis probably thought that at some time during 2022 or 2023 at the beginning, that it would never happen him going to Ferrari. His career would end with a bit of a whimper, without having a chance to really get himself around the test track of Ferrari. But now that's changed, so I'm happy for him. But as for John Elkann's decision, it's a sign of the times. Formula One has never been as popular, successful, nor as profitable. Because you've got to admit, gone are the days where it's become customary that almost every other race would see a Formula One team run out of money, have to shut up shop, and not make it through the rest of the season. Now though, no, that doesn't happen anymore. All 10 teams are in decent financial health. Either they're able to turn a really sizable profit, or if they are losing money, it's for investing reasons. It's not just because they are just really bad at managing money or anything like that. Because Doralton Capital at Williams, even though there was an $84 million loss reported in 2023, it was all in the pursuit of improving their infrastructure, getting Williams back up to code and in a modern ship-shape condition. There were good reasons for it. It was not just because they were inefficient or badly structured or in some cases corrupt. And at least you know that the teams aren't going to be making fools of themselves. Well, at least in the typical sense, yeah. They might make some silly moves on track, but at least in terms of how they actually run their team, no, you're really not going to see that anymore. So with profits and values of teams at an all-time high, Ferrari seems all the more keen to perhaps maybe turn up the heat and purchase the services of Lewis Hamilton, seek more and more profit. You can't deny that with the arrival of Lewis Hamilton, Ferrari has become a super team, no doubt. Sure, there's no Adrian Newey to help design the car, but considering how good the SF24 was, and how even with the departure of Enrico Cardile to Aston Martin, the group could still recover from their mid-season blip to once again fight for the team title near the end. That's a really positive step. And you couple that with having Charles Leclerc as Lewis Hamilton's teammate, this is probably the most decorated and enticing lineup on the grid. Sure, Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris at McLaren is probably the one that has the most potential for the future, but in here and now, Ferrari, Hamilton, Leclerc, that is a juicy pairing. You cannot deny it's going to be exciting. They are the most influential on social media. They seem to be getting on really well. They both have dogs. It's something that is really going to capture the interests and hearts of all Formula One fans, regardless of how deep they have embedded themselves into the sport. But this has not come from necessity. It's not come from a point where Ferrari's basically said, oh my god, we are going to not be front runners anymore if we don't do this right now. No. This is through sheer opportunism. And what is also really unusual, unlike every single other multiple world champion that has come over to Ferrari, is that the team themselves have been preparing for very long. That they've been bending over backwards to ensure that their car will operate and be compatible with Lewis Hamilton from day one. I do not recall any other instance of Prost, Schumacher, Lauda, Vettel, Alonso, that the team's been basically going, yeah, okay, mate, I'll make sure that the car's good. No, the car is just what it is, and then they build it up from there. No, this is the first time where Lewis from Melbourne 2025 will have a car that is in theory geared towards his own driving style, because Ferrari, they've been paying attention. I've been saying this many times. Ferrari are not just going to be sitting idly waiting for Lewis to arrive, and then Lewis goes, yeah, okay, man, what's the car like? And then he gets in and goes, oh my god, it's terrible. No, they've been paying attention to what Lewis has been saying in public about how bad the W13, 14, 15 have been. They have been realizing its weaknesses, what they can do to try to help it. And despite the SF24 being a thoroughly competitive car, Fred Vasseur has come out to say that the SF25, otherwise known as the 677, is effectively an all-new car, seemingly going against the grain of evolution considering the regulations are about to change. You think people will be spending more time on the 2026 car, but no, these are not small tweaks being made reportedly. These are fundamental changes to the suspension, the position of the cockpit, gearbox, as well as the principles of tyre management, which are all characteristics which Lewis Hamilton has made clear that he did not like about the ground effect Mercedes cars. And I need to make this perfectly clear. Ferrari needs to have this working from day one, because it's been made public about how much they spent to get Lewis Hamilton on board at a time when, in theory, they didn't need to change the driver lineup. They need to make sure that their investment, the person that they betted the farm on at a time where Ferrari was doing pretty good, not in a time of crisis or desperation, that if Lewis Hamilton did not perform in 2025 and Charles Leclerc once again against the multiple world champion completely wiped the floor with him, then it's going to make them look like a laughing stock, the investors will look really dimly on it, and then John Elkann's position as the chairman may be brought into question. This is a gamble, much like how with Luca Di Montezemolo. For the longest time, it took Michael Schumacher 5 years to win a world title with them. I remember back in 99 and 2000, there were questions about whether or not Michael would even do it. And eventually he did, and then he went on to that huge amount of domination, and that was all forgotten, that speculation at the beginning. Lewis is not going to get, more than maybe 2 years to really prove himself. If 2025 turns out to be a year where Lewis completely flops against Leclerc, he's not going to be held with much regard. His reputation will have been damaged almost irreparably. So Ferrari cannot wait for 2026. They need to have a car that can go for the title in 2025. And they need to hope that Lewis can hit the ground running so at least they can tend McLaren with the constructors. If they don't, people will not care about 2026 unless Lewis wins the title and he clicks with that set of regulations with that car. That's all very well and good. But it has to work right this second. There has been never this amount of pressure on Ferrari to impress and win things. They need to win, ideally with Lewis doing it, not Charles doing it. And that is a little bit of a mixed bit of conflict, because surely they would want Charles to win, but then they want Lewis to win. Internal management and drama. And you got to feel for Charles, because everyone thought that he was going to be the one to bring glory to Ferrari. He was the predestined, but now it's almost like the management have said, you did okay, Charles, but we'll let Lewis have a go. But no, I hope Charles takes this as yet another challenge, like he had with Vettel, and he beat Vettel, and he hopes to do the same with Lewis Hamilton, having had a few more years under his belt. Hopefully, that's the way Leclerc sees it, and he'll be fired up more than ever. We'll see him having an even better season than he did in 2024. But yeah, I don't recall any previous Ferrari hire of this caliber having this kind of treatment bestowed upon them prior to their arrival, that the car is ready for them right from the get-go. But then again, this deal is unprecedented. It's like Schumacher and Vettel's arrival combined. Sure, Vettel had 4 titles to his name, but Sebastian, was not as global an icon as Lewis is right now. Neither was Michael back in 1996. That came in the 2000s, honestly. And regardless of what you might think, this is going to be costing Ferrari $1 billion, this experiment, and it really has to work, or else they might lose even more. Because they're replacing a perfectly functional driver lineup, overhauling an otherwise rapid and competent car, installing a driver who has been allowed to assert their identity more than any other driver in F1's history, and this has come at a time when it didn't need to happen. Ferrari wanted it to happen. Now, of course, if this works out for Lewis and Ferrari, then my protests really don't matter. Then history will forget all of our lamentations, and much like with Michael Schumacher after 2000, people will think, yeah, this was a real glory run. Lewis Hamilton, potentially a 10-time world champion if he wins all 3 years on the trot. But the fact that it's so far ahead in the future, we just can't make any conclusions other than the fact that this is something that Ferrari and Lewis have not done before individually. Together, this is going to be even more uncertain. Now, this uncertainty is great for us, but for the investors at Ferrari, I hope it really works out for them come round 1 of 2025, or else you're going to get some very sweaty multimillionaires throughout that entire year. Now, I know that many people might be thinking that, oh, you're just a Lewis hater or a Ferrari hater. You want them to fail. No, I want Ferrari to be proven right. I want them to have a compelling lineup to go up against McLaren. Those two teams fighting together yet again after 50 years of competition together. Bring it on. I just hope that Lewis has done something that he can be proud of, and that this is something that doesn't fall flat on its face, because the sport needs this to work, to really take it to the next level. Even by the time Lewis Hamilton retires, he can then retire on this note. It'll go down in history in terms of popular culture. But I honestly think it would have been a lot better for his reputation had this come around in 2024 if Ferrari had the pace of the 2020 car, and then Lewis can turn it around. The expectations would be far less precarious. Anything that Lewis could do would be better, kind of like what Carlos Sainz was able to do. And judging from the results from You Find People that the survey I made yesterday attests, this story of Lewis going to Ferrari was the biggest breaking news story of the season. To find out what other stories were close to becoming the biggest breaking news of 2024, you can go and watch this video here straight after this one. It's a doozy.